Welcome to this illustration. Here we are demonstrating how to use OCI API gateway with the functions that will be invoked using a Bitbucket webhook, and it will eventually help us to start a build pipeline on OCI Oracle Cloud Infrastructure environment. And this is an alternative way until we have a native support of Bitbucket behind OCI build pipeline. So let's get started. So what we are trying to do, we're trying to do a Bitbucket webhook trigger, and that webhook is coming all the way from OCI API gateway, and behind the API gateway, it's invoking an OCI function, which is written in Python and can be any language. That function is helping us to get the latest committed code from Bitbucket repo to the OCI code repo, and then using OCI Devops Trigger, which will be helping us to start the build pipeline inside the OCI ecosystem. We'll be using OCI container registry because the functions need a Docker container image and logging functions to see what's happening behind the function. So let's get started. And if you have the full documentation, I will post the link after the video. So let's go and to see things. So as you can see, we are trying to push the code. When I say the code, the updated code version from Bitbucket to OCI code repository, which is a DevOps services by OCI. For that, we need a username and password to be used. That's pretty basic. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to set up a vault for us. So where can we see the vault? Just fasten up a bit. I've created things in advance, but I'm gonna show you every detail which would give you a clear understanding of what we're trying to do. So if you don't have a vault, you click create vault. Let me change the right compartment. Yeah. So how this would look like. So when you click on create vault, you have to give a name of the vault, and you could use HSM or software methods for the encryption. It's completely up to you. So we'll leave the documentation for you to read, and it's pretty straightforward. So once you create the vault, the second thing you create, you're going to create a master encryption key. So you can refer the documentation for the concept, what is encryption key and how things would work with OCI vault. So you're going to click create key, and I've created a key. Okay. And once you create the key, you go to the secret section and you say create secrets. So I have multiple secrets for different things, but we're gonna use, let's say, the secrets here. Let's say user OCID and one of the Docker password. So basically, how you create the secret? You create the secrets. You put the name. Sorry about that, and you select the key that we have created in the previous section, and then put your secrets as plain text or base64 encoded. It would take a couple of seconds, maybe a minute to finish all these things. Okay, once you create the secrets, we need two secrets. One secret is for OCI user, which will be used between the functions and the code report to authenticate and authorize, and in the same way the passwords. So once you create the secrets, you will see a 3 dot on the right hand side here. Click here and copy and make a note of this OCID, because we'll be using this in the further steps. So that's pretty much for the vault sections. So the next thing that we're going to do, we are going to create OCI functions. And again, you can refer the beautiful documentation to learn more about OCI functions, but in principle, we're going to create something like, so the first thing that we're going to create, we are going to create an application. So at this stage, we are assuming in the beginning itself, we are assuming you have an access to OCI ecosystem. If not, we have other videos and documentation where you can refer to get an access. You have a compartment that you will be using for all these experiments. Do not use the root compartment. That's not the best practice. You have a virtual cloud network, which would eventually give you at least one public subnet, which you will be using to host all your applications. So you're gonna say, click create the application, give the name of the application, select the virtual cloud network which you want. So in this case, I'm using this, and select a subnet. You can select multiple subnet. So in this case, I'm gonna select one public subnet. And if you want to add some tags, feel free, you can do that. And then say create the application. So you see the applications ready. So application will group the set of function that we'll be using eventually. So just forget about this part at this moment because you will not see when you're creating the application at the first time. Okay, so you have created an applications. And in this stage, we are also asking you to clone this repository because if I go to the repository, you will see it's something like function.py, which contains the functions code, what the function will eventually do, what to do from the incoming webhook contents and things. And you have a function.yaml, which is the configuration for the functions. And we have a custom Docker file, which will be used to build the base image for these functions. We'll talk about that later. So you can clone the webhook so you can follow the procedure itself. Now, in this picture, if you see, we are using a function and this function is called behind API gateway. So eventually API gateway is using this function. So in order to associate this connection, you're going to create a policy and the policy will say, hey, API gateway, now you have access to the functions. How will I do that? So the first thing that we're going to create a dynamic group. So let's go to dynamic group. Let's say dynamic, yeah. And you create a dynamic group with the function. So let's say you create a dynamic group. And you will, when you say create dynamic group, you need to give the name of your dynamic group and you will create a matching rule. So the first matching rule you would say, what type of resources that you are encompassing this dynamic group. You will say my resource.type is fn function. So fn is an OpenFN is the base for Oracle OCI function. So it's coming, the resource type is fn function. You have fn application, then you have fn func. And we are also specifying on which compartment this would be. So I will be using resource.compartment.id is equal to the OCID of your compartment. Do not copy this ID, copy the OCID of your compartment. So this is how the rule page would look like when you create it. So you add one rule, which is this, and the second rule. So we finished this function dynamic group. Okay. Now let's go back to the code that we have cloned. So then that's what I said. We're gonna look a little bit on the code. So the first thing is Docker file. So here we are using Oracle Linux 7 and we are adding some users and we are installing the Python libraries and we are starting the function handler here. Pretty self-explanatory. Then you have the function.yaml and this is where you have to put some information. So all these things you can keep as it is. This is the name, how eventually your function will look like. You can put your version at the beginning 0.0.0 and then it will increase whenever you do a new deployment of the function. And you can keep all these things as it is, or if you want to use specific things, feel free. Only thing is use the runtime as Docker, because if you use runtime Docker, it will use a custom Docker file. You can use other runtime like Python and Java. You can refer the documentation for more. Ensure the timeout is 300, 5 seconds, because sometimes you'll have a pretty big repo to clone, so don't let the function timeout. The maximum timeout is 300. Then we're going to update some of the configuration. So the first thing is OCI password OCID, the one that we created in the vault. You paste the OCID here. then your OCI project. So this project will be something that you can name it right now. We haven't created yet, but you can just create a name that you will be eventually using it. You can come back and update it later also, not an issue. Then similar way, the OCID for the user ID, the region that you will be using. So in our case, I'm using Ashburn, so you will be using the name of the region that you'll be using, and the tenancy. So the tenancy of your account that you'll be using. So you have to add all these informations and save the func.yaml. We go back to the instructions. So we are at this step. So we update all those things here. Okay. And we go to the folder and we do fn deploy -v app and the application name. Now, if I go back to my applications, at this stage you have only have the applications. So there is a tab called Getting Started. This would help you to set up the application context either to your Cloud Shell or your local setup. So this is again a very straightforward procedure. So you could use this either to have a local FNCLI on your laptops or computer, whichever you use to do this, or you could use a Cloud Shell and you can set up this pretty easily because Cloud Shell will come with a pre-authenticated, so it would be much faster for you. And just an additional thing, you can click on the Cloud Shell icon and this will launch the Cloud Shell for you. So once you have the Cloud Shell and you have set all this context, okay, and you do a git clone of this repository to your Cloud Shell, you update the function.yaml, you go to the specific folder because the name of the repo that you have cloned, and you're going to execute something like fn deploy. If you want to see the details in verbose -v -app, the name of the applications. So in this case, I'm going to say fn deploy -v -app mr deploy app, and it would take a series of steps. And once you've done that, if you go to your functions, you would see the functions here. So whichever name that you have given. So in my case, I given a fn custom hello world and kind of see these functions with with the image that you have pushed into and the details and etc. And this would come automatically, provided you have set up the right context, like what I said on the getting started. Now we have created a vault. We have built certain things inside the vault. Now we are letting the function to read the information from the vault. Okay, so how would we do that? To do so, we are going to create a policy. So how to do a policy? This policy. So just type for policies. We are going to create identity policies, not some other policies, and we will say. So let's see. I'm going to show you policy for the functions. Let me see, where is my policy? Yeah, so I've created a policy. In the policy, I will say, hey, allow the dynamic group, the group that we have created for the function, to manage all secret family in the compartment, manage vault in compartment, manage the keys in compartment. Why are we doing this? Because we are not keeping any secret information in the code, in the function.yaml. Rather, we are giving the vault OCID for the OCR username and password, and we are letting the function to read from it from vault directly. So go to your policy, create your policies, ensure you replace it with the right function DG name and the compartment name. Okay. There's also a little additional step that you can do it with the functions. So if you go back to the function applications, against your applications, so let's say go to my applications. So I have to switch the right compartment. This is my compartment. Yeah. So there is an option called locks. Ensure that you enable the locks. By default, it will be in a disabled stage. So you toggle the button You could use an existing log group if you have one, or on the fly you can just create one. So when you click one, it'll prompt you to create a new log group, given information and give the log name and enable it. Why we need this? Because this would help you to have a troubleshooting much more easier, and to see what's happening behind the functions, if there is an error or even if there is a successful executions. So that's what the enabling logging. Now what we're going to do, the next step, we're going to create the gateway. Why are we not using the functions directly behind the Bitbucket is because the functions API needs an authorization authentication mechanism. A little tricky to make that. So we're going to use a gateway here. So in our case, I think I will show you in the right region. So, and there is actually a limit that you can have one gateway per user, per tenancy per region. So my Ashburn is exhausted, so I'm gonna use the Phoenix one for the gateway. So again, it's pretty simple. If you want to create a gateway, click create gateway, keep it public. There is another video we'll be talking about private one. Select the compartment. If you want, you can select a VCN subnet. It's all completely up to you. Keep a default certificate, at least this. Then you click create gateway and your gateway will be created. Okay, so something got wrong here. So let me close this and try to see what's happening. Okay, that's a deleted gateway. Oh yeah, so this is my gateway. So I've used my gateway, and I get a public IP address. Just for information, we are not going to use this, and you will see a host name and things. You would also see some different deployments. Okay, so you have a documentation which would explain how to use gateway. Okay, now what's a gateway? Gateway is something that would help you to do a single entry point with multiple deployment, and behind the deployment, you can have multiple other uh, individual resources or juncture of multiple resources and acting as together. So in this case, what we are trying to use, we're creating a gateway. We're creating something called a deployments. Deployment will give you the actual usable um, route. Okay, and using the route, we are going to invoke a functions, and we are using this route or the whole endpoint behind a Bitbucket. So let's go back to the position. What you're going to do? You're going to create a deployment. So you would give a name for your deployment. I would use something that I created already. So you're going to give a name, any name you can give. You can give prefix. So these prefix are, the different version that you would eventually use it. So in our case, we are going V0, or you can use any prefix, completely up to you. Some of the options that we have not enabled here, but it's again, you can do that, depends on your use cases. You can do a course in this cross origin access. We set it allowed origin only for the API Bitbucket and bitbucket.org. And we also added the header, which is coming always from the Bitbucket webhook, so that the course is known the origin, and it will allow only the origin, and it will not allow all the origin, which is like somebody hitting my API just from another instance or some other origin. So you could do that. Again, rate limit, again, up to your requirement. So here I put it one rate limit per client per second. You can enable the logging or keep it for informations. Then in this part, you're going to give the path. This path is something that you will be using as a route. So for example, you will say a URL of your gateway / the prefix v0 / this path. And you can say the different HTTP methods. In this case, I'm using get and post. What is the type that we want to use it? You will see three different types: HTTP, Oracle functions, and stock response. So we are using Oracle functions. Select the application that we have created in the previous step and select the functions. That's it. So your deployment is ready. It would take a while to build the deployment. And once your deployment is ready, you'll actually see the endpoint. your endpoint is this, and the actual route would be this endpoint slash the custom route that we are given, the OCI app sample, those name that we have given. Okay. So let's go back to the procedure. So this is what I talk about, how to create the deployment. Now, if we are creating a gateway, now we have to associate the gateway and the functions. So we are saying the gateway can now use the functions in my compartment. How would I do this? In the similar fashion, we're gonna create a dynamic group. So we go to the dynamic groups, click create dynamic group. So let me show you my dynamic group I created for gateway. Um, yeah. So, and I will say my resource type is API gateway. In the previous dynamic group, it was FN func. In this case, API gateway. And I'll say in which resource that I want to use it, the OCID of my compartment. So this is like in one rule, I'm gonna combine both these things. Okay. And once you finish doing this dynamic group, go to the policy. Okay, so this is what I explained on the policy. And this policy, you're gonna say allow the dynamic group for API gateway to use the functions in my compartment, or whichever compartment that you want to use it. Okay, so you're gonna create a policy, and this policy you give a name of the policies, and then the statement is allow dynamic group, the one that we created with function. Okay, not the sorry, not with the function, with the API gateway. Okay, and use the functions in my compartment, whichever compartment it is. So you can take a reference here and make sure you replace it with the right information. This is not an OCID, this is a compartment name. Okay. In some of the case, it is OCID of the compartment. Then now we have functions, we have gateways and things like that. But we need to allow the access of this gateway from an external connection, which is basically the Bitbucket. To do so, we are going to create an ingress rule. So how do we do the ingress rule? So we go to the virtual cloud networks. Uh, and in the VCN, okay, so I've created a VCN called VCN itself. You'll see different subnet. So I've created a public subnet called FN subnet for my applications and functions. And go to the default security list, okay? And you're going to create a specific ingress rule. Click on add ingress rule, and you're gonna say can be stateless, the CIDR source type, source is 0.0.0/0, which means from anywhere outside, because I am not really sure from which segment it is coming from my external Bitbucket. My protocol is TCP, and I'm using HTTPS, so it is 443. So give some comments here, like this is for functions, and then you, in your case, it will be create, and once you create, this is available. Okay, because if you don't do so, you will not be able to access the gateway from external to your VCN. So now we have functions, gateway. Now let's try to create a little bit of on the DevOps side. Okay, so how would we do that? If you go to project, select for projects. This is meant by DevOps project. You may have to set some policies if you have not set already. So please take a look on the documentation is given. But you're gonna create a DevOps project. Now you need to give a name, a description, and you need to select a notification topic from your compartment. Um, you can actually create a topic name on the fly, or you can use an existing topic from your compartment. Why we need this topic? This topic is part of notifications. If you want to see that, search for notification on the search bar. Okay, and that would help this DevOps project to send informations to this notification handle. I'm not gonna go deeper into notification, but you will see this behind the service called notification in the OCI console. So let's create a project. Okay, let's go to inside the project. There are two things, or rather three things that we're gonna use it. We're gonna use the code repository. Let's assume it's like a GitHub for you. Then we're gonna use a build pipeline. Okay. Then we're gonna use something called trigger. So the first thing is code repository. Why we need this code repository? What we are eventually doing is when we push things to Bitbucket, we are taking the things from Bitbucket all the way to OCI code repo. For that, we create a code repo. We create a source code repo inside the project. How would you do that? Again, create a repository. You can give a branch if you want, or you leave it. There is one specific consideration here, how the way the function is created. We have created functions to use the same name between Bitbucket and the repo. So let's say in my Bitbucket, if I have a repo called OCI sample Python app, I would use the same name for the code repository. So make sure that you use the same name when you create your repositories inside the OCI. So you're gonna create a code repo at this stage. Okay. Maybe we'll also try to show you this part once again when we did the build pipeline. So let's hold with a code repo at this moment. Go back to the Bitbucket, pretty easy. So if you don't have a login, create a login, have an access to Bitbucket, and create a repository. So I use the same name, I created a repo. At the beginning, you will not see any of this thing. I just create a blank repository. Okay. In the Bitbucket account, if you go to your profile and if you go to manage your account, you could actually see multiple informations. I'm going to show you security preferences. Okay, so you have your passwords and things. Make sure that you at least use two-step verification if you want. Use API tokens and all these things. Okay, you could also add connected apps, but this is more to explore Bitbucket. I'm not gonna detail about this. Okay. And you would also create an app password for your Bitbucket because Bitbucket needs an app password for uh, doing clone actions. If you want to push something to the Bitbucket, not the clone actions, it will not be the login username and password that you use for the console, but it will be an application passwords that you will be creating. So it's in the link. You can use the Bitbucket to create that. So basically, we are going to create a Bitbucket repo. Now we are ready. We have one in Bitbucket, the same name. We have one in OCI code repo. We're gonna push the whole content. I mean, you clone this repo to your local, and you add a remote to the Bitbucket repo. So if I go to the Bitbucket, and if you clone it, you will basically get, the URL. You just say instead of clone, it will be git remote add Bitbucket and this URL because you are setting a target to push the same thing to the Bitbucket. Then you push the Bitbucket to uh, push the whole content to the Bitbucket. So at this stage, if you go back to your application, you will see all these files because this is what you have cloned from the actual GitHub. Now the content is inside the Bitbucket. Why we are doing this? Because of a simple reason, because we need a build spec.yaml. We'll talk about that later, but we are just taking it from the GitHub, pushing it to the Bitbucket. At this stage, nothing will happen, okay? Because we have not set the webhook. Now, how to create the webhook? Pretty simple. Go to repository settings, and you will see webhook, and say create a webhook. In my case, I created, but this is the same screen. Add a title. Put the URL. What is URL? This URL is a deployment URL, not the gateway URL. Deployment URL slash the route name that you've added. And you could add SSH if you want, the different triggers when you want to push it. So for a simple reason, I skip the SSL and then I say, oh, for the push, you invoke this webhook. Okay. At this stage, even if you put something, nothing will happen because we have yet to set a little more on the DevOps side. So that's pretty much for the Bitbucket side. Now go back to the same DevOps project. We have set up the code repo, the same name. Now go create a build pipeline. Again, pretty easy to use the build pipeline. You have to set a policy which is available in the documentation. But how you gonna do? You click create build pipeline and create one. So in my case, I created one with this. Okay. So you won't see this at the beginning. You create a build pipeline, then you go inside the screen, click that you will see a plus at the beginning. So let's click and click an add stage and select a manage build. Okay. And then you can give any stage name, test, whatever you want. Description is optional. Let it be Oracle Linux, okay, and let it be build spec.yaml. So this is the default path that the build stage will look for. You can still give a custom path, but in this case, we'll be using the default one. We go select here, okay, we select OCI code repository, okay, and we select the OCI sample Python app, the repo that we have created at the same name of the Bitbucket repo, and we are gonna select this. And the build source name. So build source name in OCI build side is basically this is a folder that you will be seeing on your build runner to which the clone happens. So basically, they will clone the repository from let's say OCI core repository sample blah 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 to a path, let's say my source. So if you want to do some actions on your build side, you would go to build source directory slash source. Okay, so it's basically indicating a folder to which the whole code will be cloned. So I'm gonna show you the one that I created already. So let me cancel this. So this is my setup. So I have test stage and I've used sample repo and I use repo URL and if I go here, I use the same name as my build source name just to have a simplicity. And that's all. You can leave all these things optional and then just say save it. Okay. Even if this stage, if you try to do a start manual run, it will give you a failure because you have something missing, which is build spec.yaml. Okay. So let's go back to the procedure. You create a build manage pipeline, manage build stage and the pipeline. Okay. Then there is one more thing that you need to set up here. So we have a repo, we have a build pipeline. So it's all the way coming from Bitbucket, API gateway, functions, and function is pushing, taking the code from Bitbucket, putting to the repo. But how would the build pipeline know that something happened to my code repo? For that, we use something called Devops Trigger. So you click on the triggers, basically creating a link between an action and a reaction. So you click on trigger, you will say a name of the trigger, okay, and you select the connection type. So to which side you want to connect. You can actually do it with public GitHub and GitLab. Refer the documentation for more. So code repository, select the code repo that you want, in a case this one, okay. And when I have something on this, what do I need to do? I select an action and I select the build pipeline that I want to invoke. So it's pretty simple that when you push something to the Git repo, the build pipeline will be invoked. So in our case, this is what I built it as my trigger. So I'm using the repo and the pipeline that we are set up. Okay. So trigger is also set up. Now we have set everything and everything is clean and clear. Okay. So let's do this way. Let's go and push something to the Bitbucket code repo. Okay. Not to OCI repo or to the GitHub repo what you have cloned, because we have created something on the Bitbucket. So we are pushing something to here and let's see what's happening. Okay. So let me open my console here. Okay. So I am on my local console. where I've cloned the repo and I have all these informations available here, like the Docker file, spec file, and so on and so forth. Before I do that, let me quickly show you what is inside the build spec.yaml. And again, refer the documentation for more. For the build pipeline to run, it need a YAML file and there's a specific format. So I have a build spec, a pretty simple build spec, and this is running with bash shell. And these are the different steps inside the build spec. What I'm gonna do, I'm just displaying the things inside the OCI workspace dir. Basically, it will show you what are the things that is just clone and some folders. But it is to tell you that the whole build is happening all the way from Bitbucket to OCI functions, gateways, and then to the build pipeline. One file which is readme.md, and you have function.yaml, which is updated because I've added all the OCI informations and things. Okay, because the OCID of the secret, the tenancy information, region, everything, and then I'm gonna git commit -m adding to Bitbucket. So I've added a Bitbucket, and then I say git push. To my remote name is Bitbucket itself to a branch called main. Okay, so yeah, so I've executed that. Let me go back and see here. And if you go at this stage to the webhook, okay, and if you click on the view request, you'll see a bunch of requests that's already been considered. Where is my webhook? So I go to my repository settings, my webhook, and my brief request, and I will say enable history. Yeah. So if I go here, let's say this one, okay. If it is successful, you will actually see a successful message here, like 200 or whatever it is. It depends on the return code. If there's a failure, you would also see 500, 402, and so on and so forth. Okay. So once that happens, what will happen is you could verify in the documentation also. You will see the values here, and then if you go to your um, project, the DevOps project, um, go for the build history, and you should see a build corresponding to. In my case, we have done this pretty early, so you will see a lot of build history. But if you see one of them, it actually see that the build spec YAML and the test stage, and it is executed the way that we want. It's basically printed in ls-ltr for the source folder. There's also one more way to look at things is go to the same project, go to the code repository, and you can actually go to the code that we have created, and this would now updated with all these values that we want to do. So you'll see all the different comments and things. So that's pretty much the flow. You can check the things by application logs also. If you want to see, you will see the full executions and what's happening behind the functions using the application logs. So where can we see that? So if you go to the applications and select the logs and click on the log name, and you will see the different logs that's been created. And this would be easy if there is a, let's say if you use a wrong OCID of your secrets or something that you're trying to do, a modification and things are not working in the way that it needs to be, then it's easy for you to manage it. The tail end, obviously, you can add restrict, rate limit, or header type, or even you can put a bunch of user informations uh, from the vault and say, hey, only when we see this user ID do things. Or you could say, do a dynamic verification with your LDAPs and things from a function, because it's pretty wider. The possibilities are pretty wider because it's possible to have a lot of things behind the function. And bear in mind, the function will time out in 5 minutes time. So try to accommodate all these things, whatever that you want to do, the whole computation within the limit. And func.py talks about all the functions code, pretty straightforward, and we are using Python for this, and we're using Python FDK, which is function SDK for the interactions. So that's pretty much the interactions here. We'll be releasing another explanation illustration about how do we do the same thing with a private subnet, let's say Bitbucket. In this case, we are using a public Bitbucket, pretty easy to connect it. And private, again, the same logic, but you have to do certain controls and measures between your virtual cloud network securities and things like that. So thank you. Take a look if you have any suggestions or if you have some thoughts around it. Feel free to raise an issues or feedback to the GitHub repo, and we could take it from there. Thank you so much.